Hey guys, I'm Philip Wilder, and I'm going to share with you today 3 steps that you can take to fight fear and follow God, even if He's given you a scary calling. Let's get to it. So I want to start by asking this seemingly unapplicable hypothetical question. Let's say you're just sitting down in a coffee shop or whatever, and this guy comes up to you and says, "Hi, I'm Gary Fielder, and I've heard so much about you from your friends. I want you to join me and my team, sell everything you have, come join our team, and you can call me tomorrow to tell me whether or not you're accepting this offer or not, but you have to decide tomorrow." That'd be a pretty scary thing, right? So the question is, would you do it? Would you accept his offer? Well, it's kind of hard to know whether or not you would accept his offer if you don't really know who he is. First, you'd probably go online and research who is this Gary Fielder, because that really depends. And if a lot of your friends have talked to him about you, then you might want to try and find out who those friends are to figure more out about this guy and whether or not you can even trust him. Maybe he's a scam artist or something. Probably not a very good one if that's his whole pitch. But you would do that sort of research. And say after you do that research, you find out that this Gary Fielder, he's started 50 different missions organizations or missions bases around the world. And he's founded about 200 different companies to provide for those missionary bases and provide all the funding for it, provide salary for all the missionaries, and all the other sort of work that he does. If you found out all of that, you'd probably be like, okay, this Gary Fielder guy is a pretty legit guy. He seems pretty awesome. And say you find your friends that have talked to him about you, and you ask them about Gary Fielder, and they're like, oh, this is an amazing guy. Like, you should definitely do it. I wish he would have asked me, but it makes sense that he's asking you. If you found out all that stuff, you'd be much more excited to join him. Well, how does this relate toward the 3 steps of fighting fear and following God faithfully, even if He's given you a scary calling? I want to answer that first by going to Haggai chapter 2, verses 4 through 5. And I'll read it here. It says, "Yet now be strong, O Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, O Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares the Lord. Work, for I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts, according to the covenant that I made with you when you came out of Egypt. My spirit remains in your midst. Fear not." I don't want to explain the background of this. This takes place after the Israelites got expelled from the land. God kicked them out of the land, basically. And now God's bringing His remnant of people back into Jerusalem. This is 70 years after they were exiled. So they've been gone for a long time. The temple has been completely destroyed. And now God's calling them to start rebuilding the temple, but they're not listening. The people are afraid to start rebuilding. So verse 4 talks about God basically saying, be strong, don't be afraid, I am with you. So the first point first step in following God and fighting fear is to remind yourself of who God is. God tells them to be strong, but then He follows that up immediately by saying, work, for I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts, according to the covenant that I made with you when you came out of Egypt. So God tells them to be strong, but then He reminds them, I'm calling you to do this because, I want you to know that you can trust me because I'm the same God who brought you out of Egypt. So if God has given you a scary calling that maybe you have a lot of fear about, remind yourself all the amazing things God has done for you in the past. If you recall the things God has done for you and the things that God has done for others, if you read His Word, then you can have a lot more confidence knowing that you can really follow God. God is a good God, and He desires good things for you, and He has good plans. Now, of course, those good things aren't good as the world might say, but they're good inherently for you. They will build you up. God's going to take care of you. So this relates back to that earlier hypothetical scenario with Gary Fielder. Just like how you would research who Gary Fielder is, we should research who God is. If God's calling you to do something really scary, we should figure out, does God even have the credentials or the ability to take care of us through this? Can God even work with us through this scary assignment? So remind yourself of who God is and what he's done in your past and just in the past in general. The second step is don't look at your ability, look at God's ability. So oftentimes if God calls us to really scary things, we might think, well, how can I do this? How would people listen to me? Or how can I make this sort of difference? Well, don't look at your ability, look at God's ability, because he's the one who's going to equip you, and he's the one who's ultimately going to be doing the work through you. He just wants to use you as a vessel. Now, this is not to say that we shouldn't seek to be credible people in these sort of areas. Like if God's calling you to be a teacher, maybe you should go and get schooling to become educated and to become more equipped to do the sort of task God's called you to do. But we need to be focusing on God's ability, not our ability. And this is exactly what was happening with the Jews in this time. They were afraid. The whole verse 4 is talking about God encouraging them. But if you drop back a little bit further into verse 3, it basically mentions how these people don't consider themselves able to rebuild this temple, which makes sense because the first temple was built by King Solomon, who was the richest and wisest king to have ever lived, basically. So this temple was full of gold and it was just ornately decorated. And these people at this time, they're thinking, well, we just came out of exile. Like, we're poor people. We don't have much power. We don't have much knowledge about all these things. How can we build a temple when this great and mighty king built the last one? And God's reminding them, be strong, like do not be afraid, because I will be with you, as he says at the end of verse 4, declares the Lord of hosts. The Lord of hosts, the one who brought them out of Egypt, is going to be the one with them, working through them. So we need to not look at our own ability, we need to look at God's ability. That's the second important step. And the third step, we need to remember not to be afraid. This sounds so simple, but it's so hard when you hear that calling from God and immediately that fear strikes you. You can remember who God is and know that God's capable. You can remember that God's going to be the one doing the work, not you necessarily. And you can find confidence and comfort from all of that, but fear will still be there. I remember when God called me to the Middle East, I was terrified. I was so afraid to go, even though I knew God was strong, and I read plenty of other missionary stories. And even though I knew I was weak and I knew that God would work through me, I was still so afraid. Even the night before I went to the Middle East, or the month after going to the Middle East, I was so afraid. And the important thing is even despite that fear, we just simply need to press through that fear. The fear does not mean it's not what God's calling you to do. In fact, in many cases, when we have fear, that means God is calling us to do something, because fear is one of Satan's primary tactics to keep us from doing what God has called us to do. So we need to not be afraid or press through that fear. Just don't let fear have a voice in your life, or don't let fear control what you do. So in summary, the 3 steps that we need to take to fight fear and follow God, even if he's given us a very scary calling, is first, we need to remember who God is. God is far bigger than our problems. God is far bigger than the opposition, or far bigger than the task. And he promises to be with us just as he promised to be with the Israelites in Haggai chapter 2, verse 4 through 5. Additionally, we need to look at God's ability rather than our own, because we can't do it on our own and we need God to work through us. And 3, when that fear comes, we just need to press on despite the fear and not let fear control us. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this encouraged you, and I hope this will really help you take those next steps of faith. Have a great day.